Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of recieves, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Merchant of Death, written by NoCam Davis. Humans are a peculiar race. I've heard of them before, a loose group of aliens in an uncharted region of the galaxy. One of their many nations had managed to defeat the Kavash, which in itself was a monumental achievement. Overnight, those young upstarts made waves, though not for the reasons you might think. You see, most of us, we knew better. No one beats the Kavash. No one has the firepower or the numbers, or so I thought, but one human, a simple peddler, proved me wrong. I am a Moltarian, from the Moltarian Confederacy. We control 3 systems full of resources, filled to the brim with our kind. Sure, sounds like a lot until you look at our history and realize that until 10 human years ago, we controlled 15. Blame the Cardov. They had bled their space dry and were looking for more, deciding the Confederacy had what they wanted. They pushed us back hard before we even knew they were coming. They took 3 of our systems before the Council got wind of the invasion. The fleet tried their best, but we're an isolated people. We only had so much territory because no one paid us any mind, meaning that we had very little experience fighting a war. Not that most people would, but the Kavash and the Oro convent around. Before long, refugees were flooding the inner systems, and Trade Station 47, my station, became a temporary housing area for refugees waiting on a permanent shelter on the surface of the planet. We knew they were coming, and we were hoping they'd leave the station unmolested, seeing as there is nothing to gain from its destruction. Nonetheless, we were absolutely terrified, stalk eyes clacking in worry, when the hyper footprint appeared in our scanners, one large enough to be called a super battleship. But it wasn't. It was a single ship of unknown design, loudly broadcasting a message we couldn't translate, but we didn't detect a weapon signature. So we cautiously sent them coordinates to a docking bay. The strangers didn't speak our language, which was normal, but we Moltarians have a fallback, our telepathy. Shame you can't send a telepathic message over comms. Someone should really work on that. Or get the Domio Sapiens to give up their tech. Apologies, getting sidetracked. Anyway, the first person to disembark the ship was a short alien, about 162 centimeters, 2/3 of the size of an adult Moltarian. They didn't even flinch when I spoke to their mind, which told me they'd been exposed to telepathy before. Apparently, this was a human, a woman calling herself Josefina Perez, a freighter captain from a place called Mexico. I later learned that it was a place on the human homeworld of Earth. She said that she was technically making first contact, but really just looking for a place to maybe take on some goods and sell at home and give her crew some rest. And this seedy joint was perfect. We didn't exactly have the space due to the refugees, but the station master never says no to business on their station. So of course I said yes. Her ship, the Queen Celeste class freighter, had a crew of roughly 20 other humans, which struck me as odd. Her ship was massive, a full kilometer, a human measurement, in length, and should have room for 3 times that, plus the cargo space. But she waved me off when I questioned her. Instead, she wanted to know all about my people, saying that her leader, something called an emperor, would love to deal with us. I had my doubts, but whatever. In my office, which had a small window overlooking sparsely populated planet below, we exchanged stories. She was from the main nation, the ones that claimed victory over the Kavash. She called it the Solarian Empire, saying that it was the oldest human nation in space and held their homeworld as capital. Until humanity, the idea of multiple different nations of the same species made no sense. But as I said, humans are a peculiar people. I told her about the Confederacy, and she seemed interested, even asking for mundane specifics, mostly about culture and religion. I told her about Erla, the place where those who have brought harm upon others are sent, dragged down by demons. She countered with a place called Hell, where a servant of her god was cast out with his followers for their rebellion, and the souls of humans that refused to accept the message of her god were sent to be tortured for all eternity, as well as those that took their own lives, and a myriad of other reasons. It was a horrible place by the sound of it, and I was honestly disgusted by it, even with the notion of paradise for the faithful. She seemed to notice my distress, unusual for a race that we've just met, so she talked about her past. 7 spawn mates, 3 males, 4 females, and all of them joined their nation's military. Though, while all her spawn mates, which she called siblings, went into the ground forces, she chose the fleet, or, as she stressed, the Solarian Navy. A fleet is a formation in human terms. Either way, it struck my interest, so I asked about her experience. She told me tales of pirate hunting, peacekeeping, and the one that really got my attention was a story of a border clash with another human nation back when she commanded what she called a light cruiser before she retired and bought her current ship, CMV Gabriel the Messenger. Now, there was the standing order that we don't discuss current events with aliens, especially ones that might put us in bad light. But I felt there was no harm in it. I started telling her about the Kardov and their inevitable encroaching on our homeworld. Had I known humans as well as I did, I wouldn't have gone much into detail. But I was inexperienced with her kind and didn't know what the slow change in her face meant. She was warm and smiling when I was talking, but by the time I finished, she looked, her face was as hard as the armor of a warship, and her eyes could have doubled as targeting for missile batteries. She started asking about defenses and the strength of the fleet, which I was ashamed I couldn't answer. She told me that she'd have to talk to her people about this, but I initially brushed it off. She left soon after that, back to her ship. Not too long after, Station Control reported she sent a burst transmission off into the void without having reported her intentions. This was a breach of conduct, as the transmissions tended to alert the Kardov, but she was a guest and a new one at that. She didn't know any better. The next cycle, her crew began unloading containers from her freighter, which turned out to be supplies, cloth that could be used to cover one's body, food that humans eat, water, and various luxury items that could be sold for a decent amount. I told her that she wouldn't find much business here, at least not for the price some of her stuff would fetch due to refugees. But she waved me off. She said these were donations. Humans had a policy of helping those in need. Humanitarian aid, she called it. Fitting that a term meant to provide assistance had their name in it. The refugees usually would have swarmed the workers, but she kept them at bay with firm words and rather judicious waving around of what she called a baseball bat. Once the crowd was under control, they began passing out supplies, though warning that the food was meant for humans and couldn't be guaranteed safe. Luckily, it wasn't too far off, though. I heard it caused many digestive issues. It was a great help and eased the stress on station logistics. Perez informed me that she'd called her people, specifically her navy, and had told them of the situation. Even if Shield Base, I'm guessing the command station of her navy, didn't want to get involved in our war, they'd still send some more aid. In fact, she guaranteed that there'd be supply ships coming. When I told her the Kardov had attacked supply ships in the past, she laughed, telling me that if the Kardov would get past their escorts, they deserved the kill. Humans have a bit of an egotistical streak, it seemed. She did, however, make a single trade. as she traded me all of the supplies for a translation program. Apparently, her people could make one quickly if they had the database of her language. I was able to provide it, and 2 of her people vanished into the ship and never came back out, supposedly to get to work. 2 cycles later, that fateful day came. I was called to station control as a large hyperfootprint was detected. The guard of the Armada had finally arrived and were heading into system. It was the majority of their force, 30 ships in all, led by the 2 super battleships. This wasn't a raiding party. This was a force meant to conquer and destroy. When we broadcast our non-combatant status, we were promptly ignored and detected shields being raised. Raid Station 47 had no weapons and only basic shielding to protect from debris, so the Armada would be making quick work of us. As I prepared myself for the ritual of death, as I knew the refugees were, I received a strange message. CMV Gabriel the Messenger was requesting permission to depart. I granted it, waiving the docking fees. As I knew a freighter would be just as vulnerable if it stayed, and the last thing her empire needed was to be dragged into our war. With this story she told me about border clashes and piracy, they must have had so few ships to spare. To my surprise, however, the ship was on an intercept course for the approaching Armada, the massive ship burning away at the speed it shouldn't have been able to achieve. I calmed Perez to ask what she was doing, and she told me that she couldn't sit back and just watch as unarmed innocents were slaughtered. It was against her moral and religious code, and was against the oath she took when she joined the Solarian Navy. When I reminded her that she too was an unarmed innocent, she only laughed. She told me that was the point, before she cut the line. I heard her order the Spanish Inquisition, though at the time the term was meaningless to me. As the freighter approached, the Armada ignored it. Excuse me, I forgot humans referred to their ships as she. They must have thought she was harmless as they waited for her to come into range. The human ship may have been as large as the super battleships, but the translation program allowed them to broadcast their status as a freighter. She moved past their screening units unscathed. As the super battleship's plasma cannons began charging, no matter how powerful her shields may be, the god of super battleship's main guns were powerful enough to slag a warship's armor. I watched in horror as I saw the suicidal range she was at. At that range, the Cardiff could have thrown a rock and hit the ship. And then there was a massive surge in energy before the super battleship shuddered like a wounded animal. I was in shock as the energy surge had come from the human freighter. We detected it again, and the super battleships began venting atmosphere as the other ships around finally realized something was up. As Gabriel began to turn through the interference, I finally picked it up. The human freighter was running energy weapons, though at the size vastly smaller than anything the Cardiff could ever have managed to achieve. Explosions at the sides of the freighter made my heart skip a beat until I realized that she'd fired missiles, now streaking towards the lightships. Cardiff missile defense was impressive, with rarely a missile getting a hit in. So, imagine my surprise when the missiles all detonated before impact, just out of range of the Cardiff plasma missile defenses, and more energy surges were picked up. The humans were firing missiles that themselves fired small energy weapons. The lasers ripped through the unprepared ships, killing all but one, which started to limp away before 3 more missiles ran it down, and then the luck changed. The entire Armada had changed their plans and decided to focus their entire fury on this one ship. Though by now, we could all pick up the impressive array of weapons on board, I suddenly realized why there was so little room as we counted. On each side, 5 energy weapons, 5 plasma weapons per side, 3 launchers, and a single mass driver. As the enemy opened fire, the shields flared, actually taking the brunt of the damage as more missiles streaked away from the ship. The injured super battleship was hit with a pair of kinetic rounds, shattering the shields seconds before plasma bolts slammed into their armor, adding to the hellacious damage the first two energy barrages dealt. Everyone knew kinetics were the perfect counter to shields, but the size of the weapon plus the ammo requirements meant that few fleets used them. As we watched, mesmerized by the back and forth, my mind turned back to my first conversation with Perez, when she mentioned her religion's hell. I made up my mind that her crew had to be escaped followers from that rebellious servant, because not once did the weapons on Gabriel slow their rate of fire. You could accurately time the reload speed of the missiles and mash drivers as they fired with precision that no Moltarian could have matched under that much enemy fire. And there was a lot of it. As powerful as the humans' first attacks had been, the element of surprise was lost. And that ship was too large to be able to avoid all the plasma and missiles thrown their way. But still, they fought on. More and more Cardiff ships fell, but we began noticing less fire from Gabriel. I finally worked up the nerve to calm the ship, and Perez answered. She was a mess. Her hair frazzled, a red substance on her face I learned later to be their blood. But her eyes had a fire in them that she was grinning like her mind had left her. I told her to leave. She'd done enough and didn't need to sacrifice her crew. But she told me something in a language I later learned to be Spanish. The only word I remember is mother. She sent another burst transmission to the station, encrypted, and asked me to give it to her people. I told her to give it to them herself, but she shook her head, saying that her weapons were already glitching and that she had enough power left to fire the hyperdrive. I told her not to, that her religion says that she'll go straight to hell. The last words I ever heard from her was telling me that someone had to drag these bastards to Erla. CMV Gabriel the messenger fired her hyperdrive and, knowing what I do now about astrogation, had disabled all the safeties and set the destination as the exact point they were at. The freighter ripped open the fabric of space, bleeding the radiation of hyperspace into normal space, as the detonation engulfed the majority of the light ships around her, making a vital shipment of death to the enemy. When the hyperblinders that inflicted on us had faded, my heart fell. For all her sacrifice, for all her hard work, one of the super battleships remained, as well as 3 of her screen. But they were slower. Either she'd cowed them or she'd managed to damage their engines. It didn't matter either way. As the Cardiff were approaching still, they would be in range in a quarter of a cycle, but it was far longer than we had expected. It gave us enough time to try and come up with a lottery on who we could evacuate on a few sublight shuttles, so the refugees could die on the surface of a planet, instead of suffocating in vacuum. They were in range by the time we had 2 shuttles loaded up. I stood on the observation deck, facing the approaching enemy. I had decided that I would be the first to die, at least symbolically. I closed my eyes as I waited for death, which never came. They should have fired by now, but before I could theorize as to why they hadn't fired, an excited voice came over the comm from the young technician still at station control. Another hyperfootprint had been detected. When I pulled up the feed, I had to demand the technician check the sensors for damage, but he reported that the sensors were undamaged. 350 ships, ranging from 375 meters to 6 behemoth ships over 5 kilometers in length, had entered the system with an unknown IFF tag. 350 ships was larger than the Confederate fleet and the Cardiff Armada combined. But it was the transmission that told me all I needed to know. A visual feed was established, revealing a human man in a red uniform with a face that matched Perez's back when I told her our situation. He announced himself as Rear Admiral Alex Cortez, the commanding officer of Task Group 32.7 of the Solarian Navy on a relief mission, and that the system was under their control. The Cardiff mustn't have understood a single word, but you'd have to be an idiot not to recognize superior firepower and a willingness to use it. But I also have never said the Cardiff was smart. They turned their weapons to the new arrivals, but never got a shot off as the humans opened fire, turning the remaining 4 ships into free-floating atoms before Cortez asked me who was in charge and for a status report. I have never been so happy in my life to see an alien. The avian-looking Voltarian, with stalked eyes and 3 legs in a tripod arrangement, finally finished his story. The fine hair on his chest had puffed up with emotion, the Voltarian equivalent of holding back tears. He stood before a thick desk that separated him from a man in a simple lavender suit, stroking his beard, long hair brown tumbling down his shoulders. The station master of Trade Station 47 had completed the final request of Josefina Perez, delivering her encrypted message to her people. However, he didn't expect that Emperor Rudolph I would want to hear the events of Battle of Curlay 4 personally. Station Master Magrovac, was it? I appreciate you coming to tell me this personally. I had my theories when Admiral North told me one of his reserve officers had made contact and was demanding assistance. But nothing of this magnitude. While you were traveling here, I sent a message to your council. The Solarian Empire will send, free of charge, any aid needed to alleviate the effects of a war of aggression. I have also informed the Cardiff that under no circumstances are they to enter your space, as my ships have orders to use lethal force. Task Force Orion has been dispatched to begin to retake your lost systems, and a team from the Minister of Foreign Affairs is on their way to your capital to discuss terms of a treaty. A week ago, Magrovac would have been absolutely floored at the amount of diplomatic and military power these humans had to casually swing about. But at this point, nothing surprised him. Your Majesty, you said that you had theories. May I ask what they were? Rudolph smiled and reached under his desk before standing up, holding a box and a bundle of cloth in his hand. They were about how a run-in with the Cardiff would have gone, and I was not let down. And since Captain Perez deemed it necessary to show the Cardiff what humanity does to its enemies, it is my turn to show the Voltarian Confederacy how we treat our heroes. He set the bundle on the table and opened the box. The Imperial Medal of Heroism. The Imperial Senate has it awarded to any member of the Solarian military that displays gallantry, courage, and self-sacrifice above and beyond the call of duty. Though Captain Perez was a reserve officer and technically off-duty and in her private armed merchant cruiser, she had no oath or duty to defend your people, nor was she under any orders. But she did, and so the Senate deemed it worthy enough cause to bend the rules and award her this. Rudolph carefully unwrapped a bundle of cloth, revealing a ceremonial sword in a gilded scabbard. The station master gave an emperor the curious look, but held his beak. He'd learned swiftly the human leader liked to teach. The Order of Gunther is something I personally give to those that I feel have performed a great service to the Solarian Empire or for humanity as a whole. However, today I'm expanding the Order, because the galaxy is getting larger, and I can no longer, in good conscience, not recognize those that sacrifice for those not of their own kind. And so I, Rudolf Gerhard Gunther, Emperor of Rudolf I of the Solarian Empire, posthumously inducted Josefina Perez into the Order with the rank of Knight Captain. He sat on the desk next to 2 awards as the Voltarian processed everything. Your Majesty, he started to ask, choosing his words carefully, my people have similar things we can award, but if I may ask, why are you presenting this to me, as if I am receiving it? Rudolph couldn't help but grin as the alien walked right into his carefully laid trap. Because you are. You see, Captain Perez, didn't tell you the whole story. Her siblings all died in the Reykjavik incursion. Her parents died long ago. She had no one but her crew. And as of a week and a half ago, you and your people. So by tradition, the awards are given to your people to safeguard. Perez was human, yes, but through her actions, she became a Maltarian, at least in spirit. Yes, I did some research on your religion as you traveled, and I also spoke with the Pope, the man at the head of her religion. While Perez did in fact take her own life, she did so to save the lives of others while in defense of the innocent. She isn't being punished, as you probably worried, but instead in her paradise. So, take the medal, take the sword, and bring them home. Perez's body is gone, but you now have physical mementos. Magravak could only nod, the feeling in his heart making it hard to breathe, and as he returned home, he decided that Perez's medal would go to the council for display on the new monument that they were erecting, but a sword would go to the station. When he set foot on the docking bay, he was greeted by a mural of Perez and her crew, faces in a defiant smile, looking right at anyone that stepped onto station, a warning to those that looked upon them, that the merchant of death were not to take kindly to those that would threaten Perez's seedy joint. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Draxoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.